Chapter 46, Last Days of Summer. And thanks to my betas, Daryldeem and Alex33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. And I used the Google Translator for the spells. It took forever to get something close to what I wanted, but since I don't speak any form of Latin, I am sure it is wrong. Feel free to correct me if it is. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HP same day. Well, night as the Potter men walked toward the house, Harry started getting a bad feeling. A niggling memory was tickling his mind, something he was supposed to remember, and something that was going to take away his good mood. He stopped dead, all the blood drained from his face. He looked to his brother to see Gary looking at him with wonder for a minute, and then he too paled and stood still. Both boys turned to the house with twin looks of horror. "What's gotten into you guys?" James questioned after he noted they stopped. He was still feeling excitement from the great game. "Mum," they intoned together, with a great deal of dread lacing their voices. "What about her? Did you guys prank her before we left?" James said, coming slightly down from his game high. Lily was never in a good mood if she had been pranked and had no one to vent to. "Worse," came the duo answer. The twins looked at their dad now and tried to convey just how bad it was going to be with the looks upon their faces. James looked at his sons, and when he saw their drawn faces and that they were truly scared to go to the house, he said, "You better tell me what you did, and I'll see if I will side with you or your mum." "I had one of those dreams last night, but I didn't want to miss the cup, so I wrote it down and had Sally tell Mum where the letter was after the game started," Harry explained hurriedly. "Let me get this straight. You had one of those dreams." Harry nodded. "You didn't want to miss a Quidditch game, granted the biggest game of the year, nevertheless still a game." Harry nodded again, this time a little sheepishly. "So you wrote it down and had Sally, of all people, tell your mum where it was." After the game started, Harry opened his mouth to defend himself and stopped when James raised his right hand. "I'll help, only because I understand, but only after she's yelled at you for at least 5 minutes," he said firmly. The twins looked at each other and then at their dad and nodded. At least one of their parents understood the need to get out every now and then. Besides, it was the Quidditch World Cup. How often would one of their teams make it? They shared a look and decided that 5 minutes of yelling was worth it. How bad can it be? It was worse. Lily didn't yell. She stood there with her arms crossed and an extremely angry and disappointed look on her face. Her big green eyes were narrowed as she looked at her two contrite sons. Her jaw tightened as she remembered the fear she felt when she read the letter. "Just why didn't you boys answer you mirrors?" she asked through gritted teeth. "We didn't hear them," Gary said, taking her anger off his brother. "The noise in the stadium was very loud. I doubt we would have heard them even if you were yelling." He looked to his dad to back him up. James nodded his head in confirmation, but still stayed silent, standing behind the boys. "Okay, I'll buy that. Harry James Potter, explain," she said forcefully. She reached into the back pocket of her jeans and brandished the letter to her oldest son. "Mum, you know we love you, right?" She nodded her head with a small furrowing of her brow. "We put up with you keeping us in the house for the whole summer with little complaint." The confused look deepened. Lily didn't like where he was going with this. "We could have whined and complained. We could have stomped around the house and ignored you. There were lots of ways we could have shown you that we didn't agree, but we love you, so we didn't. However, I knew if I told you about this dream, you would have kept us home for one of the few days we wanted to go out. That's why I didn't tell you." He lifted his eyes to look at his mum, showing her the look of defiance that had been missing all summer. "He has a point, Lily. I know if my parents had made me stay at the manor for the summer, I would have made their lives hell," James spoke up, even though it hadn't been 5 minutes. He had to agree their sons behaved better than most teens would have. "That explains why he left the letter. I don't like it. I'm still angry. I want to punish you more." She bit out, fuming that Harry had a logical reason for his actions, but still angry at the fear she felt all day and wanting to strike at something. Lily slashed her hands in the air and got back to the reason she was angry to begin with. "The point is you left to go to a sporting event when you knew about information that we needed to have. We could have called a meeting and discussed plans." "No, Lily, we couldn't have," James said firmly, interrupting her tirade. Most of the parents and children were already at the event and had been for days. You're being unreasonable if you think they should have thrown away their chance to see the biggest game of the decade because of a dream. The whole group has been on edge trying to help us. They are, however, not at our beck and call. He looked at his wife, chin raised, arms folded, and a defiant look in his eyes. For your information, I did have a meeting, Lily said defensively as she turned to face her husband. With someone who doesn't like Quidditch, he said back firmly, figuring she met with Albert. About, she continued as if he hadn't spoke, a couple of spells to get rid of the Horcrux in Harry's scar, which could have waited until tomorrow, her husband rebutted. Look, Lily, we get you want to get everything done right away, but it shouldn't be at the cost of people's home life. Everyone needs a day off. You need a day off, but no matter how we try, you won't take one. It's not fair for you to demand us to do the same, James said, running a hand down his face. He gestured to the silent boys and stated, the twins are correct, they've been far better behaved than anyone else would have. I think they've suffered enough, so I am putting my foot down and saying that Harry will not be reprimanded for going to the game. He turned to the twins and said, go and change, then call you friends and talk about the game. He waved to the stairs and shooed them away. The twins took off like a shot, glad someone else was willing to face an angry Lily. They did as suggested and kept their conversations to the cup. They did tell everyone they had other news, but didn't want to talk about it right now. Lily and James argued for almost an hour, until Lily finally vented enough to see reason. She agreed that as soon as the Horcrux was out of Harry, she would take a day with the girls. When the special edition of the Daily Prophet showed up depicting the chaos that happened at the Cup, the fight almost started all over again. It did start mirror calls that lasted into the night to make sure everyone from the group was okay. According to the article, the parents made a good showing of themselves by standing up and fighting the Death Eaters. Surprisingly, it seemed a lot of the campers did. The Hopkins men were credited with saving the camp manager and his family. The mutineer teens that were still on the camping grounds were given the duty to guard the children in the woods. There were a few injuries, but nothing serious, so a meeting was called. The Death Eaters got away with emergency portkeys. The Auras had been late in showing up, but soon enough to obliviate the non-magicals. Amelia was going to be pissed. The next day, the mutineers and their families gathered in the usual dining room. After verifying that everyone was indeed okay, the Potters told everyone about the dream, causing the kids to promise they would be vigilant. Plans and schedules were made up. The children would be taught a disillusionment charm before they went back to school. Pepper-up potion would be given for those who stayed up all night. There were contingency plans drawn. They wanted to cover all bases. If anyone was caught trying to enter either boy's name, they were to defend themselves with extreme prejudice. A small committee was created to do the spells on Harry's scar. Lily and James were the primary casters. Remus, as his godfather, would be backup, and Gary was needed to anchor Harry down. Maya was going to guide the soul piece where they needed it. The Longbottoms, sans Neville, were going to be on the outside of the room to prevent anything escaping or to do the spell if the soul piece entered anyone in the room. They figured keeping it as close to the prophecy people as possible would help with the removal of the partial soul. The group met 3 days later. This gave Harry enough time to meditate, fast, and do a cleansing ritual. It was time. Harry, dressed in a cotton floor-length robe, and nothing else, was laying on a marble table that had been brought into the warded room just for this ritual. He knew this was going to hurt, so he steeled himself for the pain and waited for his mum and dad to get started. His body tense and his eyes clinched shut. James stood on Harry's right and Lily on his left. Both were also clothed similarly to Harry. Gary was next to James, holding Harry's hand. Remus stood at the foot of the bed, ready to cast if things went sideways. Maya stood behind Lily with a necklace at the ready. It was a masculine necklace, with a rune-covered silver disc about the size of a galleon. Lily ran her hands in Harry's hair and asked, "Are you ready, sweetie?" Lily felt frustrated that it was such a simple spell, but it wasn't in any of the wizarding books they researched. She found it on a pagan website, along with the cleansing ritual, and she still had to adapt it from its original purpose of spiritual cleansing. Harry simply nodded and kept his eyes shut tight. James and Lily lifted both arms and joined hands above Harry's head and started chanting, repel aliena anima. They had to recite this 13 times, and then the piece should free itself from the scar. Maya stood at the ready, the necklace hovering between their joined hands. On the third chant, the area around Harry's eyes pinched, and he started tearing. On the seventh chant, his whole face pinched, and his jaw tightened to the point of grinding. The grip on Gary's hand was brutal. On the 13th chant, he yelled, and his body arched. He pulled so hard on his brother's hand that Gary almost collapsed on top of him. Gary kept his thoughts focused on keeping his brother grounded to the present. He took as much of the pain as he could, while keeping standing and reciting over and over through their link. I'm here, never once stopping. He felt the pull of the Horcrux through the link and chanted louder in Harry's mind, keeping him from following. A grey mist rose from the scar, and Maya quickly wrapped it in a bubble spell and directed it to the necklace, which was only a few inches above the scar. Animalagavaris, he incanted once the mist surrounded the necklace. The mist seemed to dissolve into the rune-covered disc, and everyone relaxed. Harry almost passed out with relief. While he trusted Sally, he didn't want someone else's soul in his forehead. He would wear the necklace and hope that it would serve the same way the scar would have. That went better than I thought it would. That soul piece didn't even put up a fight, Maya said in mild disbelief. Also, the mist was grey and not black in nature, most unusual. He rubbed his chin and thought his forehead creased with confusion. I'm just glad it's over, Harry said, using his brother's grip to rise off the table. His head felt lighter, almost muzzled as it readjusted to its Horcrux-free state. There was a knock on the door and Frank peeked in. All done. We heard the yelling, then nothing. When there wasn't anything trying to escape, I figured I'd better check. All clear, Lily said with the biggest smile she had all summer. Tomorrow I'm going to the spa for a week, she announced. You men can take the children to Diagon Alley instead of me and the girls for once. She looked pointedly at James, who always seemed to be busy that day. He just nodded his head in agreement and patted his sons on the back. Well done, guys. Why don't you go and get changed? He suggested. We'll make sure that soul piece is locked nice and tight on that necklace, and then we'll give it to Harry. The tired boys nodded, and slowly Harry got up and joined his brother at the door. Thanks, everyone, he said, and then made his way up to his room. There was a bottle of pepper-up waiting by his bed, so he took it and then changed into some shorts and a t-shirt. Gary came into his room, wearing much the same. We'd better call Daphne and Susan first, then they can chain call everyone else, he said, pulling out his mirror and getting comfortable at the head of Harry's bed. Harry nodded and removed his mirror from his bedside drawer and made his call from the desk. Needless to say, both girls were relieved that they were okay and promised they'd be over later that day. Both boys had no problem with this, and soon enough they got off the mirrors to go and find the adults. They met them in one of the sitting rooms, and Harry took the necklace with good grace after it was explained to him that the soul piece didn't register as dark. Since there were no compulsions on the necklace, they felt that it would be safe. None of the adults could explain why, but it was a huge weight off everyone's shoulders. Harry and Gary knew, but were bound by vow never to tell anyone, because of the closing vow on the twin ritual circle. Sally knew, but felt it wasn't her secret to share. Lily disappeared the next day along with most of the wives. The men grudgingly took the teens to Diagon Alley. The kids were happy to once again be together, as a group, on an outing. They didn't split up like they usually did. They stayed as one big group, which made for crowded shops. Madame Malkin chastised James for not giving the usual warning to the shop owners. The men mostly hung around the outsides of the stores, making sure that no one entered while the kids were shopping. They used the excuse that the place was full, which it was, and they were waiting for it to empty. It worked like a charm. See, they didn't need women around to corral kids. Unfortunately, because they were hanging outside, they didn't see what the kids were buying. Nothing too bad, but the totals at the registers were high, especially at the robe shops and the Quidditch store. A very tired group of men went home that day with much lighter pockets. HPHPHP, and I am not completely happy with this one, but it does get the job done. I am trying not to hurry and make the rest of the story sound rushed. So once again, if updates come sporadically, then it is because I am getting frustrated with plot holes. Chapter 47, One Down. And thanks to my betas, Geraldine and Alex 33 for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. And Dumbledore's speech is from the book. Disclaimer. I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HPHPHP, a short narrative. The train ride was just as fun as always. Many of the mutineers and their friends gathered in the carriage. Laughter and excitement over the World Cup was heard for most of the ride, though there were some that were worried over the Death Eaters. It did occur to many that the public was standing up for themselves. Unlike the last time the Death Eaters plagued the magical community, they could place it all on Pandora's crystals. Many of the other children, outside the mutineers, were told about the Triwizard Tournament and that Harry or Gary's name might be called. The two boys made sure to tell everyone that they didn't want this to happen. Most believed them after the years of knowing the two helpful boys. The opening feast went well, though Dumbledore was a bit shocked that not many students below fourth years seemed surprised that the tournament was going to take place. He blamed the mutineers, rightfully so, but there was little he could do about it. There were many grumpy students. Quidditch had been cancelled for the year, and they couldn't really understand why. The months passed until it was time for the other two schools to join Hogwarts. The mutineers made sure to keep a good eye on everyone in the castle. No one that didn't belong showed on their maps, and the ghosts heard no word that anything was out of the ordinary. Harry didn't have the dreams anymore, so he had no idea what Voldemort was up to. Gary was glad of this. He hated those dreams. October 30, 1994, it was a cold and crisp autumn day. The students and staff were all outside waiting for the other two schools to show. They didn't know how they were going to arrive, so the students mostly just fidgeted looking around the grounds waiting for something to happen. There, yelled a sixth year, pointing over the forest. Something large, much larger than a broomstick, or indeed 100 broomsticks, was hurtling across the deep blue sky toward the castle, growing larger all the time. "It's a dragon!" shrieked one of the first years, losing her head completely. "Don't be stupid, it's a flying house," said Dennis Creevy. And he was almost right. It was an enormous powder-blue, horse-drawn carriage, the size of a large house, pulled by a dozen winged horses, all the size of elephants. When the carriage stopped, a young boy jumped out and placed some steps at the door. A gigantic woman emerged, along with a dozen boys and girls. They were all dressed in blue uniforms and appeared to be freezing. Dumbledore greeted the woman, who must be the headmistress, as Madame Maxim. They seemed to be old friends. While the two heads talked, the Beauxbatons students shivered in the Scottish cold. The twins felt sorry for them and were about to offer their cloaks when it was decided that the chilly students would wait in the great hall. Hagrid came and cooed over the winged horses as he led them away. The Durmstrang school arrived a bit later, via the Black Lake, in a large boat that bubbled up from the depths of the water. These students were dressed much warmer than the Beauxbatons students had been, and they were sturdier built. Dumbledore greeted the headmaster much the same way he had Madame Maxim. This person was addressed as Headmaster Karkaroff. The twins didn't like him at first sight. They would do well to keep an eye on this guy. Among the Durmstrang students was Victor Crumb, much to the delight of Ron. Everyone made their way into the great hall. Since it was a feast, they all sat at their appropriate tables. Beauxbatons sat at the Ravenclaw table, and Durmstrang sat with the Slytherins. The mutineers made sure that all the visiting students were made welcome. When all the guests settled, Dumbledore stood. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts, and most particularly guests," said Dumbledore, beaming around at the foreign students. "I have great pleasure in welcoming you all to Hogwarts. I hope and trust that your stay here will be both comfortable and enjoyable." One of the Beauxbaton students sat shivering next to Harry. "Here," he said, pulling off his outer cloak. "This might help." He offered it to the girl. She smiled and thanked him as she pulled it over her uniform. The others boys at the table did the same, and soon all the French pupils were covered in warm cloaks. Even the boys were grateful. "The tournament will be officially opened at the end of the feast," said Dumbledore. "I now invite you all to eat, drink, and make yourselves at home." He then sat and started a conversation with Karkaroff. Many of the Hogwarts students felt the same pull they had during the World Cup. One of the girls from Beauxbaton was a Veela, or at least part. Pulling themselves together, they enjoyed the feast. There were many new dishes added to the normal fare. Some of these were bouillabaisse, ratatouille, pieds paquets, soup au pistou, salade nissos for the French students, and pelmeni, karladits or studen, shchi, arkroshka for the pupils of Durmstrang. Harry made sure to try a bit of each. It wasn't often that he got to taste non-British food. Others followed his example. The foreign students seemed pleased that Hogwarts would go out of their way to make them feel welcome. After the dessert was completed, which also had cuisine from the other schools, the plates disappeared, and Dumbledore stood once more, gaining everyone's attention. "The moment has come," said Dumbledore, smiling around at the sea of upturned faces. "The Triwizard Tournament is about to start. I would like to say a few words of explanation before we bring in the casket, just to clarify the procedure that we will be following this year. But first, let me introduce, for those who do not know them, Mr. Bartemius Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and Mr. Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports." The crowd politely clapped as each man stood, though they did clap louder for Bagman, who seemed to enjoy the attention. "Mr. Bagman and Mr. Crouch have worked tirelessly over the last few months on the arrangements for the Triwizard Tournament," Dumbledore continued, "and they will be joining myself, Professor Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime on the panel that will judge the champions' efforts." At the mention of the word champions, the attentiveness of the listening students seemed to sharpen. Perhaps Dumbledore had noticed their sudden stillness, for he smiled as he said, "The casket, then, if you please, Mr. Filch." Filch, who had been lurking unnoticed in a far corner of the hall, now approached Dumbledore carrying a great wooden chest encrusted with jewels. It looked extremely old. A murmur of excited interest rose from the watching students. "The instructions for the tasks the champions will face this year have already been examined by Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman," said Dumbledore, as Filch placed the chest carefully on the table before him, "and they have made the necessary arrangements for each challenge. There will be 3 tasks, spaced throughout the school year, and they will test the champions in many different ways: their magical prowess, their daring, their powers of deduction, and, of course, their ability to cope with danger." At this last word, the hall was filled with a silence so absolute that nobody seemed to be breathing. "As you know, 3 champions compete in the tournament," Dumbledore went on calmly, "one from each of the participating schools. They will be marked on how well they perform each of the tournament tasks, and the champion with the highest total after Task 3 will win the Triwizard Cup. The champions will be chosen by an impartial selector, the Goblet of Fire." Dumbledore now took out his wand and tapped 3 times upon the top of the casket. The lid creaked slowly open. Dumbledore reached inside it and pulled out a large, roughly hewn wooden cup. It would have been entirely unremarkable had it not been full to the brim with dancing blue-white flames. Dumbledore closed the casket and placed the goblet carefully on top of it, where it would be clearly visible to everyone in the hall. Anybody wishing to submit themselves as champion must write their name and school clearly upon a slip of parchment and drop it into the goblet, said Dumbledore. Aspiring champions have 24 hours in which to put their names forward. Tomorrow night, Halloween, the goblet will return the names of the 3 it has judged most worthy to represent their schools. The goblet will be placed in the entrance hall tonight, where it will be freely accessible to all those wishing to compete. To ensure that no underage student yields to temptation, said Dumbledore, I will be drawing an age line around the Goblet of Fire once it has been placed in the entrance hall. Nobody under the age of 17 will be able to cross this line. Finally, I wish to impress upon any of you wishing to compete that this tournament is not to be entered into lightly. Once a champion has been selected by the Goblet of Fire, he or she is obliged to see the tournament through to the end. The placing of your name in the goblet constitutes a binding, magical contract. There can be no change of heart once you have become a champion. Please be very sure, therefore, that you are wholeheartedly prepared to play before you drop your name into the goblet. Now, I think it is time for bed. Good night to you all. The mutineers all looked at each other. This would be a long night, and they would have to stay awake to make sure that no one entered the Potter twins' name. Everyone in the great hall stood, and the Beauxbaton students were told they could return the cloaks in the morning, so they wouldn't get cold as they returned to their carriage. Harry and Gary shared a look, and understood they would have a mental talk when they got to bed, after they talked to their parents. They would also have to talk to Sally about having the ghost patrol the area. The mutineers and some friends gathered in the entrance hall. "So what do we do now?" Susan asked as she held on to Gary's hand. "Well," Harry said, making him the center of attention, "we need to make sure no one gets near the cup with mine or Gary's name." "Me and George have the latest curfew," Fred said from Harry's right. "Yeah, we can stay and watch everyone until 10, George nodded in agreement. "That would be great, guys," Harry said sincerely. "Yeah, now how about the Hufflepuffs use the mirrors and maps until bedtime?" Susan said. The Hufflepuff students voiced their agreement. "That way we can call you too," she pointed at the Weasley brother, "if we see anything strange. Then the Ravenclaws can do the same until 1 in the morning," Harry offered. His housemates nodded. "We," Daphne said, pointing to the Slytherins, "will take the midnight to 3. "That leave the Gryffindors to take the 3 to 6, Dean said, looking to Gary, who nodded. "But what do we do if anyone beside Hufflepuff sees someone?" "I mean the twins will be in the dorms by then," Hannah asked, a little warily. She understood how important it was, but didn't know how to stop someone from doing what they were planning. "The mirrors in the common room," Mandy said with a snap of her fingers. "They added them at the end of last year, in case someone got hurt. Call your head of house if you see anyone that doesn't need to be out past curfew." "Yeah, we'll keep watch in the common rooms, that way they'll be right there," Spencer said. "But how are we going to convince them?" Hannah asked. "Tell them a ghost told you, or better yet call out to your house ghost and tell them to run and tell a professor," Gary suggested. "Don't forget Remus has a mirror too," he added, causing many students to relax. The soldier floated through the students, making them shiver, and looked around at the youngsters. "We ghosts will be patrolling the area. If you call to your house ghost, they will answer," he said. "Okay," Harry said, clapping his hands together. "We have a plan. Everyone try and get some sleep. We'll all meet up at the Goblet in the morning and keep a closer watch. Make sure to bring your maps. We'll figure out a way to hide them. I have an idea, but we better break it up now before we're out past curfew." It wasn't the best of plans, and many things could go wrong, but it was all they had. Good nights were said all around, and the group broke up and went to their dorms. After everyone called their parents, the mutineers settled down for a long night. "Hey, Mum," Gary said, smiling into the mirror. She looked much less stressed now. She had taken a day out of her spa visit to make sure they got on the train. Then she and the other mums went back for an extra week. "Tell me some good news," Lily said with a returning smile. "Well, we have a plan. It's not foolproof, but it's a start," he said with a shrug, and then proceeded to tell her about their plan and now the names were chosen. "You kids do your best, but leave us to handle any intruder. Your dad and some of the other fathers will be in the Shrieking Shack tonight, and they will switch off with others tomorrow," his mum said. "Why they're not in the library?" Gary asked with a yawn. "It's closer, silly. Besides, it has a tunnel into the grounds. You must be tired to ask that. Why don't you get some sleep?" she suggested gently. "Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm going to talk to Harry a bit, then I'll get some," he said, stifling another yawn. "Harry," Gary thought to his brother, "how are we going to know who has what name on the papers they submit?" "I don't know, maybe a show of force, or have Sally read them or something," his brother thought back. Sally appeared and tapped Harry on the shoulder. He looked at her and held up a finger for her to wait a minute. She nodded and settled next to him on the couch he was sitting on in the Ravenclaw common room. "Sally is here. You get some sleep. I can feel how tired you are," Harry sent. "Okay, tell me what she says later," his brother answered. "What's up, Sally?" the green-eyed boy asked, after he looked to make sure no one around. "What were you and Gary talking about?" she asked with a tilt of her head. "We're worried that we won't know what the slips say. I mean, anyone could put our names in the cup and we wouldn't even know. We've got everyone watching the maps, but what good does that do if we can't read the slips?" Harry said a bit loud, venting some frustration. When the older students turned his way, he just shook his head sheepishly and waved them away. Many just nodded back. It was getting on bedtime, and so they gathered up their things, and after bidding Harry a good night, they went to bed. "That's a good question," Sally said, tapping her chin in thought. "I could read them for you, or have one of the other ghosts do the same." "That would be helpful, but you said you couldn't interfere with the living," Harry said. "And I won't. If someone has your name on the paper, it will be up to you to stop them. I can only warn you." "Oh, did you want to train for a while? I know I could be doing something and my friends are all in bed getting a nap before our shift." He looked around the common room to make sure they were alone. The other students of the house knew Harry stayed up late, though nobody knew why. Okay, let's go blow off some steam. And she jumped from the couch and all but ran to the door. It wasn't until 11 that evening that anything happened. Harry was watching the map when he saw Peter Pettigrew appear in the forbidden forest. James Potter, he called in the mirror. We see him, Harry. You keep a lookout for anyone else and call Remus if you see anyone, his dad said as soon as his face appeared in the mirror. We still don't know who the other guy is. I'll keep watching. Done, Harry said quickly, not wanting to impede his dad. With the parents, James, Sirius, and the other two men crept out of the shack and followed the tunnel until they were in the grounds. They kept to the shadows and followed the progress of Pettigrew. They silently made their way to the forest, and when they spotted the rat, they fired off a barrage of deadly spells. They weren't going to let him get away this time if they could help it. Different colored spells filled the air. The target was small, though, and ran as fast as it could through the trees to get away from the men chasing it. He almost got to the end of the map's boundaries when Sirius sent a blasting curse to the area the rat was in, and the ground blew apart under him, causing the body to be thrown in the air. It smashed into a tree and was knocked out cold. Let me kill him, James, Sirius said as he stomped towards the limp rat. Sirius had always been the more bloodthirsty of the marauders. It took a lot of time for him, and Snape even speak to one another. No, you'll wind up in Azkaban and we need you here, James said as he conjured a cage just big enough for the rodent. Sirius, said Wright as he held the grey-eyed man back. You promised Amelia that if we could capture him, we would. Fine, Sirius said, yanking himself out of the other man's grip. That doesn't mean I have to like it. Come on, let's get out of here before Dumbledore gets here, Daryl Jackson said, after James put Pettigrew in the cage. He didn't want to have to explain why they were on school grounds. Yeah, James nodded and quickly looked at the map. No one was moving their way, so they made it back to the Shrieking Shack unmolested. James called Amelia and let her know they had her escaped prisoner. Daryl volunteered to take him to the 3 broomsticks. James cast an impervious spell on the cage and handed it over. James called Harry to let him know that they captured Pettigrew and that they were keeping watch again. Back with Harry and the Ravenclaws, the kids watched and saw the parents' names converge on the rat. Harry let out a sigh of relief when his dad called with the all clear. They were just getting their stuff together to let the Slytherins take over when they saw another name on the map, this time coming from the front gates. It was Bartemius Crouch. It's going on midnight. Why is he here? Harry mused out loud, so he called his dad and informed him. Not much we can do about him, James said with a shrug. As long as the tournament is here, he can come and go as he pleases. Okay, Harry said with a yawn. I thought I'd let you know. Go to sleep, Harry. Daphne has already checked in. I'll call Remus and have him guard the goblet for a while, James said, to put the boy's mind at ease. Okay, Dad, good night. Done, the tired teen said, and put the mirror away. He and the rest of the exhausted kids went to bed. HP, and sorry for taking so long. I'm still battling plot holes, so updates will still be sporadic. I also wanted to get the story back to where I wanted it to go in the first place, and that is the boys not having to confront everything on their own. The whole premise for this story is so the Potter twins have their parents backing them. So sorry if that's not your cup of tea. Chapter 48, The Imposter. And thanks to my betas, Daryl and Alex 33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HP, October 31, 1994. Harry was just waking up when he got a mirror call from Daphne. What's up, Daph? He said, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. Just checking in to let you know the only weird thing that happened last night was Mr. Crouch was around the goblet most of the night. Remus seemed to chase him off, though, she answered with a yawn. I let Gary know when it was his shift, so you're going to have to ask him if he was still there later, the Slytherin girl concluded. All right, thanks for telling me, the green-eyed boy said. You look like you need a bit more sleep. Did you take a pepper-up? Harry, you are not supposed to tell a girl when she is not looking her best, Daphne chastised. No, I haven't taken mine yet. I will do it in a minute. Oops, sorry, I'm still learning all about you girls, Harry blushed and ran his hand over his face. Daphne's face softened. It's all right, Harry, I forgive you, but don't do it again. She shook her finger at him in mock disapproval. Harry smiled. He was glad he wasn't in real trouble. I'll see you at breakfast. Will you be joining us or keeping the Durmstrang students company? I think I had better keep an eye on our visitors. We don't want their only contact with the school to be the uppity purebloods. Harry nodded in agreement. While he and Draco never really got along, they didn't fight either. However, Draco's views on blood supremacy didn't bode well for good relations. Then I'll see you at lunch. Done, he said, and then put away his mirror. He took a half a dose of pepper-up and got ready for the day, all the while talking to his brother. So anything happened last night? Well, this morning. Yeah, that Crouch guy kept hanging around the cup. Remus was there the rest of the night, so he didn't get near it, Gary answered groggily. He would need a full dose of the pepper-up potion in order to complete this day. Did you talk to Dad? Yeah, he told what happened with Pettigrew. That was kinda neat, the tired Gryffindor answered. Harry felt a surge of energy through the bond and knew that Gary had taken his potion. Well, we're going to have to go and make sure our names don't wind up in the cup. Okay, let me get dressed and we'll meet in the entrance hall, Gary suggested. See you then, bro, Harry said as he cut the link. Harry finished getting dressed and grabbed the invisibility cloak and his map and made his way to the entrance hall. His dad had given him the cloak this summer for security purposes. He said he had held off this long because there was only one cloak and two sons. It was only because Harry was the oldest that it was passed on to him. He met up with a large group of the mutineers. They all made their way into the room that housed the cup. It was a large room off the side of the entrance hall. It was square, and the cup was sitting in the middle of the room on a large pedestal. There were a few benches littered around the room so people could watch who was submitting their name. So how are we going to do this? Terry asked as they all settled in a circle around one of the benches. It's Monday and we have classes. It's a good thing we're all in different houses and years. We can split up a rotation. Every time you don't have class, come here and watch the cup. The ghosts are going to try and read the slips of the people entering. If they see our names on the paper, they're going to warn us and then the teachers. If you can, try and stop or stall them until a professor comes. Don't do anything that will get yourself hurt, Harry said as he looked over his group of friends. It was a very warm feeling to have so many people look out for him and Gary. We can do that. All it will take is a simple, stunning charm. The only problem I see is if it is one of the visitors. I mean, we don't want to start an international incident, Susan said thoughtfully. Yeah, that could be a problem. Try and do something less aggressive, like a hovering charm or something. That way they won't get hurt, but can't move forward. Or maybe a sticking charm, Gary said, rubbing his head in thought. The rest of the group nodded in agreement, and they all pulled out their schedules and started going over who would be where and when. Luna, Spencer, Ginny, and Astoria being in third year helped. Sally's ghosts hung around the fringes listening in on the students. While all this was going on, one of the ghosts was keeping an eye on the cup and the students submitting their names. So far nobody was acting suspicious, though the caretaker, Mr. Filch, was hanging around, watching the mutineers, but that wasn't unusual. That man hated them. All but two of the group headed to breakfast. It was decided that they would go to their own table this morning, and most of them would meet up as the study group later. They didn't want to overwhelm their guests with too many people at once. Harry decided on hot cereal this morning, and while he was doctoring it up, he looked to the visitors. Hello, I don't believe we were introduced last night. My name is Harry Potter, he said to the lovely girl sitting next to him. She was quite beautiful, as were most of the Beauxbaton students. Her hair was long and almost white blonde. She was willowy and well put together. I am Fleur de Lacre, she said, a bit haughtily, like she was speaking to a commoner. You are the brother of Gary Potter. Yeah, I'm his twin, Harry said with a lifting of his eyebrow. She came off as a bit stuck up, maybe it was defensive. I have heard many things about your brother. It is said that he is powerful, The blonde asked, an eager look in her eye, which put Harry on edge a little bit. Then he felt the pull of a Vila. Gary, watch out for this one. Seems she is the Vila we felt last night, and she seems to have taken an interest in you, Harry sent to his brother. He felt the acknowledgement through the bond and saw his twin glance their way. Well, I wouldn't go that far. I would say he is okay, power-wise, Harry hedged. Maybe you are just jealous. Fleur said with a bite to her tone. She threw her hair over her shoulder and went to turn away from the little boy. Harry laughed, banging his hands on the table, causing Fleur to turn her attention back to him with a confused look upon her face. I and my brother are very close. You won't find many siblings closer than we are. There is no need for me to be jealous of Gary, he said between chuckles. Maybe what you say is true. We shall see, This time she did turn away and start a conversation with the French girl next to her. Harry just shrugged and finished his meal. He wanted to be around the cup as much as possible today. When he was done, he made his way to the room. He slipped in the back and got his cloak out of his backpack and put it on. He took out his map and watched the cup. Sally was there looking at each slip that passed her. So far, nothing went wrong. When the time came for class, he left the room and ducked behind a tapestry and put his cloak away. He then went to class like normal. The eldest Potter twins' first class was history, which thankfully was still taught by Professor Watts. She waited until the class entered and settled down before going over the history of the Triwizard Tournament. Today, we'll be learning about the history of the Triwizard Tournament. The only reason I didn't go over this before is because I wanted to wait for our visitors to come. As you can see, we have guests in this class. Madame Maxim has given her blessing to her students to attend our classes for this week so that they can see what different types of learning there are. The professor floated back and forth in front of the class, tapping her ever-present ruler in her hand. Harry looked to the back of the class, and sure enough there was a group of 6 Beauxbaton students there. They looked like they were mystified as to why a ghost was teaching this class. There were also 3 Durmstrang students on the other side of the class. Their faces were blank as they studied the teacher. Let us not forget our other visitors from Durmstrang, Professor Watts said with a nod to the 3 boys. We should also not forget that the entire reason behind this competition is to promote international relationships. You would do well in finding people among our guests with similar interests and attempt to make friends. They could be quite helpful in understanding foreign relations that could become lifelong friends. The visiting students looked a bit shocked at that remark. They had been told that the students of Hogwarts were not interested in making friends with foreigners. The heads of their schools based this on the treatment they received from the British ministry, which, needless to say, was lacking. Everyone stand up, the professor instructed. Everyone complied. Now I want you to mingle a bit and see if you have common interests. Take 5 minutes and ask non-invasive questions like, do you like Quidditch? Then sit with the person you think you might share something with. Then I will resume the class. The class did as they were told, tentatively. Harry went up to one of the Durmstrang boys and asked if he liked dessert and what kind. I did enjoy the treacle tart that Vas served last night, the boy answered. But I prefer the Kiev cake of my country, he added in a heavy accent, though his English was quite good. I love treacle tart, Harry enthused. He clapped the boy on the shoulder and led him to a desk in the middle of the room, with Terry shaking his head as he followed. I think I would like that cake you spoke of. I wonder if they will serve it tonight. My name is Harry, by the way, and this guy behind us is Terry. What's yours? I am Barn, the confused boy said with a curt nod. Glad to meet you. We should get to know one another at lunch. You can sit at any table if you want, so you might as well join us and we'll bond over dessert, Harry said quickly as he noted their time was almost up. The 3 boys sat down and turned their attention to the front of the room. Professor Watts was tapping her ruler on her legs, anxious to get started on her lesson. Okay, everyone, take a seat, she called over the ruckus. The students complied, and they were quite a bit more mixed up than they had been previously. She then launched into a lengthy description of the Triwizard Tournament, how it was started between the 3 schools in 1294 and continued until the death of all 3 participants in 1792. She went over the past trials, who won and who died. She could only speculate on why it was restarted this year. All in all, it was a good class, and there were many notes taken, because if there was one thing they learned in this class, is that if the professor was teaching something, there would be a test. Meanwhile, with Gary's first class was Defense Against the Dark Arts, with the Slytherins. They were learning about the tournament as well. They didn't have Beauxbaton visitors, but they did have 3 students from Durmstrang. Remus, or Professor Lupin, was teaching about the tasks and the spells used to overcome the obstacles. Like Professor Watts, he made sure to name the champions who completed the tasks and those who died trying. At the end of the class, Gary went to Remus to ask the tired-looking man about Crouch. "Hey, Uncle Remus, what was with Crouch hanging around the goblet all night?" he inquired with a questioning look in his eyes. "What are you talking about, Gary? Barty wasn't anywhere near there last night. I couldn't use the map because Filch was hanging around all night," Remus asked, confused. "Oh, this is bad," Gary said as he pulled his uncle into the office. He whipped out his map and looked for Crouch. "Remus, there are two Bartemius Crouches," he said seriously. "What?" Remus shouted as he took the map from the upset boy. "Damn it, I'm calling Amelia." And he pulled the mirror from the special pocket on his robe and called the head of the DMLE. "Amelia, we have a problem," he said as soon as her face showed. "What is it?" the woman asked. Gary just pointed out that there are two Crouches on the map. "Isn't JR supposed to be dead?" Remus asked. "Yes, he died in Azkaban years ago. Barty was quite upset for months. It was around the same time his wife died," Amelia answered, her face scrunched in confusion. "I'll be there as quick as I can. Use the map and try and find who the imposter is," she commanded. "Right. Done," Remus intoned blandly and then turned to Gary. "Go to class and we'll handle it. Be careful. Don't go anywhere with anyone, even someone you know. If you have to, take your map out and make sure it is not the imposter," he instructed as he led the boy from the office. "I need to tell Albus. It is still his school after all." He wrote a quick note to hang on the door that the next class was cancelled. "Okay, Uncle Remus," Gary said as he made his way out of the classroom. "Harry, there is an imposter in the school. Be careful and check your map to verify anyone asking you to go anywhere." "Right, do we know who he is posing as?" came the reply. "No, but Remus said that Filch was hanging around the cup all night," Gary answered. "Okay, thanks for the warning. I'll see you at lunch," Harry said and cut the link. Harry told the mutineers that were in his potions class, and Gary told the ones in charms. When it was time for lunch, they all decided they were going to eat at the same table. It was a good thing Hufflepuffs were used to the group taking over their table. Most of them had friends in other houses, thanks to having to sit elsewhere at meals and study time, though they did note that the fourth years of that group were rather tense. The third-year mutineers quickly joined their peers and asked what was going on. They were told what happened, and they too started to get anxious. When Barn and 4 other Durmstrang students joined them, they tried to lighten the atmosphere. "Hey, Barn, this is my brother Gary," Harry said, pointing to his twin, who sat on his left. "Duh, I could tell the Resem likeness," the older boy said with a bit of difficulty. "You are worried about something," he said, noting the tension. "Yeah, but don't worry, the adults got it covered. I hope," Harry said, waving it away. "V could maybe help," Barn offered. Then he turned to his fellow students and introduced them as Schmidt, Kyle, Kurt, and Victor. "Hey guys, welcome to the Hufflepuff table," Harry said as he shook their hands, which impressed Victor because they didn't make a big deal out of him being there. Harry introduced all of the mutineers, and they all settled down to eat lunch, which still had dishes from all the nations represented in the school. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm not sure how anyone can help," Gary said, bringing the subject back to their worries. "We could maybe understand if we knew what the problem was," Victor replied. "We didn't want to worry anyone, but we think someone is trying to enter Gary in the tournament," Harry said, with a very concerned look on his face. "Why would someone do this?" the Quidditch star asked, his own face scrunched up. "Well, you know they call Gary the boy who lived, right?" Nods were seen from the visitors. "We think that someone is trying to kill him because he is a celebrity," Harry said in a whisper, not wanting to alarm the foreigners that Voldemort was still out there. "Duh, this I understand," Victor nodded, and then turned to Gary and gave him a sympathizing look. "We will keep Vatch." Gary expressed his thanks, and the discussion turned to mundane things for the rest of the meal. Meanwhile, with the adults, James just got off the mirror with Remus with a sigh. They had been in the shack all night and were just getting ready to switch over with the next group. "We need to keep an eye on the map. Mooney says there are two Crouches. So we want to watch both of them," he said to the 8 men gathered in the torn-up living room of the shack. "How are we going to tell from here who is who?" Wright asked, stifling a yawn. James noted they were all tired and started handing out pepper-up. "We can only tell who is leaving and how. If one of them goes to the Forbidden Forest, then we'll go and intercept him." "Isn't JR dead?" Sirius asked. He remembered the reports of all the Death Eaters in prison. One less Death Eater was one more they didn't have to worry about. "That's what we thought. Who knows what SR has done?" I wouldn't put it past the man to break the law. Remember how he tried to get you thrown in Azkaban, even after we told him that Pettigrew was the secret keeper? No time to speculate now, Daryl said. We have to keep watch. And he sat down with the map in his lap as his eyes roamed over the forbidden forest. Everyone else did the same, but took different parts of the map until they found both crouches. I've got a body with Dumbledore. Looks like Remus is with them. Man, I hope he doesn't have to tell that old man about the maps, Sirius said, keeping an eye on the headmaster's office. Me too, but if he does, hopefully he will tell him that his is the only one, James answered, still looking for the other body. Hey, I found the other one. He isn't in red, though. I wonder how that happened, Eric Davies said, pointing to the moving figure. He's moving awful fast, going to the main gate. Sirius, right, you're with me, James said, jumping up from the lumpy couch and running to the tunnel. Call the library and let them know he might be headed their way. Daryl whipped out his mirror and called his wife, who was manning the map in Hogsmeade. The three men ran through the tunnel and froze the Whomping Willow. They then made their way to the gate. Seeing a running Filch, they yelled for him to stop and started firing incapacitation spells. The man didn't even turn. He just kept running to the end of the wards, ducking and weaving to make himself a harder target. Just as a bone-breaking curse hit his leg, he made it to the ward line and disapparated away. Damn it, James said. Now what? Sirius asked, panting from the run. We still keep a close watch. Are the other two schools on the map? We need to learn the names of the students so we will know if there are more than there should be, James asked. Beauxbaton is on the map, but Durmstrang is just outside the border, Wright said as he looked over his map. Oops, we'd better beat it. Dumbledore is coming. The trio ran to the ward line and disapparated to outside the Hogsmeade library. They let everyone there know what was going on, and they snuck their way back to the Shrieking Shack. They spent the rest of the time trying to figure out how the imposter fooled the map into thinking he was not an enemy. The only thing they could come up with was Pettigrew somehow found out about the color coding, and Voldemort charmed him in some way. They would have to spend some time going over the charms to prevent it from happening again. Back to the teens, rumors started floating around Hogwarts and the two other schools. Bartemius Crouch, SR, was arrested by Amelia Bones. They didn't know what for, just that the man was pulled as an official from the tournament and taken in for questioning. Harry and Gary spent the study hour around the goblet. Sally was reading every name that went by her. They were keeping a close watch. Harry was under the invisibility cloak watching the map for Crouch Jr. Suddenly, Sally tensed and signaled Gary. Sally just signaled me. That guy with the buzz cut has one of our names, Gary said, moving to intercept the boy. It looks like he is in a daze. Try and subdue him. I think he is under the Imperius, he told Harry. He moved in front of the curse boy and said, Hey, my name is Gary Potter. What's yours? Harry in the meantime shot a levitation charm at the Durmstrang student, causing him to lift off the ground by a couple of inches, just high enough that he couldn't walk. I must put this name into goblet, the boy intoned. You could see in his eyes he was trying to fight the curse. I can help you, Gary suggested, feeling the strain his brother was feeling to lift such a large object for so long. How about you give me the name, and I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go? Duh, yes, I can do this, the struggling boy answered, and handed the slip over to the boy who lived. He felt himself lowered, and that seemed to give him enough of a jolt to break the curse. They were taught how to overcome the Imperius at Durmstrang. This just happened to be a strong one, which he fought all the way to the goblet. He didn't even know how it happened. He was just outside the ship when he was handed a piece of paper and had the overwhelming urge to put it in the goblet. Now, he felt in his pockets for his own entry and moved to add his name. Gary saw Sally nod that that piece was okay, and he moved out of the other boy's way. Thanks, Gary beamed at the poor teen. I'll make sure this is taken care of. He turned away and then ripped the paper in two and went back to his brother. They kept a close eye on the goblet for the rest of time it was there. Then they went to the great hall for dinner. Since it was Halloween, there was a feast that night, and everyone had to sit at their own tables. The visiting schools were not held to Such and Barn. Victor and two of their friends joined the Gryffindor table, causing Ron to sputter his admiration for Crumb. Victor made sure to sit by Gary to get away from the rabid fan. Good luck on getting your name drawn, Gary said with a smile, ignoring Ron's glare. Thank you, Victor said. Outside he looked calm, but Gary could see the tension around his eyes. They ate and enjoyed the meal, similar to the one they had just last night. All eyes turned to the front of the great hall when Dumbledore stood and moved to the goblet of fire. The mutineers tensed. Did they make in time to stop the impostor?